Greetings viewers, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to talk more about EJ series engine timing belts and components. I've got a collection of old components I've pulled off, some that have failed, some that are cheap aftermarket Chinese components, and the original Japanese components. We're going to compare and contrast each one, show you why you really need to spend the money on the original equipment parts, and show you common faults, common failures, and things to look out for when you are inspecting your timing set on your EJ series engine. So starting off in the video, we're going to talk about probably the most important component. I say most important, but truly every single component in the timing set is just as important as the others. If one of them fails, it can wipe out the entire timing system and destroy your engine regardless. But one major thing, one thing that's important to check, one thing that it's especially important to buy original OE quality is the timing belt tensioner. Here we've got several different tensioners. We've got, I think, 3 or 4 original equipment Japanese, NTN, Subaru, Fuji Heavy Industries tensioners, and I think we've got 1 or 2 aftermarket one. This one offhand is an aftermarket. Just eyeballing it, you can already see that the plunger is thicker and the edge here of the hydraulics is thicker. So right off the bat, we can see that. Also has a more prominent casting mark. So let's look at first a good original Japanese OE tensioner. All of your original equipment tensioners, to identify them, they should say NTN and or Japan. They may or may not be stamped with Fuji Heavy Industries. A Fuji Heavy Industries stamp, let me see if I can find really quickly. I'll just put it on the screen. I'll put it right here, the emblem for Fuji Heavy Industries. Those that do not know what Fuji Heavy Industries is, Fuji Heavy Industries used to be the parent company of Subaru vehicles, but since I believe 2018, I believe they changed the name of Fuji Heavy Industries to the Subaru Corporation and completely swapped that around. So yeah, for an actual Subaru original, it'll say Japan, NTN, and should have the Fuji Heavy Industries logo somewhere. Also on your tensioner pulley, the actual pulley, it will say NTN Japan. I don't know if I'll be able to show you this with this lens without swapping up. Maybe I will. But right there, NTN, and right there, Japan. I know it's a little out of focus. So, one thing about these, I had some messages after last week's video on timing belt kits, on the Ison kits. People that had bought Gates kits and talked about the fact that the Gates kits say to bleed the tensioner. A lot of people were under the assumption that was because the Gates kit was an aftermarket tensioner and cheap quality, that you needed to bleed it. That actually goes for all tensioners, even Subaru genuines. And the reason behind that is pretty simple. This is a set sealed hydraulic piston in here. It is compressed, and as you see, there's a pin in here to keep it depressed. Once you get everything in, most of you know, you pull the old grenade pin here, as we like to call it, and the piston, under its sealed hydraulic pressure, applies tension against the tensioner bracket and swings down to hold the belt taut and tensioned. Well, this is a sealed piston, but there is the potential during shipping, depending on how it lays, if it gets flipped upside down, if it lays on its side, there is a potential for air bubbles, air pockets to get into this sealed cylinder, and it will cause issues with the hydraulic force behind this. So it speaks about this in the Subaru factory manual under inspection of this component. Gates in their timing belt kit has the process laid out. Ison does not, as far as I know, mention this in their installation instructions. I suppose that they would figure you're going by the factory service manual and have the information or would know to do this, but average DIY people don't know to do this, so we'll talk about it right now. Is the bleed procedure for these to ensure there's no air bubbles, air pockets in this sealed piston. So what you want to do is, I'm not going to do it right now, is you just straight up pull the pin, pop, let it go. You then want to recompress this, reset it, and stick the pin back in before installing it on the car. For years, I bolted these on and pulled the pin and let it go. Not an issue, but there's always that possibility that trapped air can get in here. So now, over the last 2 years or so, I have always bled my tensioners. I don't believe I mentioned that in my time belt videos, but that's something, it's just an extra step that, you know, it's worth the 15 minutes to do it. But what you do is pull the pin, let it pop out. Now, before you reset this, you don't want to use a C-clamp. You don't want to clamp this in a bench vise, something like that. I mean, you do have to put pressure on it to retract this piston, but it's a slow process. You can't just crank that sucker down and then put the pin back in. If you do, you will compress it too quickly, and you'll likely blow the seal out and blow your hydraulic fluid out, and then it's no good anyway. So if I recall correctly, the Subaru factory service manual states that the process of resetting from fully extended to where you can put the pin in should take no less than 10 minutes time. So you want to do this very slowly, little by little. You want to do this in a shop press is ideal, where you can have this straight up and down in the shop press and to press it straight down with the shop press. As I said, you don't want to put it on its side. You don't want to use like a C-clamp or a bench vise because you'll be clamping it this way, and that's the potential for air to get in. You want to do it with this pacing straight up. So if there's any air bubbles in here, any air, it will be pushed up, forced out the very top there around the seal. It's kind of like bleeding brakes. The brake bleeders are on top of the caliper rather than the bottom because air always goes to the highest point in a hydraulic system. So that's why you want to make sure you bleed these out. So here's a factory one, as I showed you what all the markers are, what to look for. This is a good one. You can reuse these tensioners. You want to inspect them first. There are specifications in the factory service manual. I'll put that on the screen now for checking these before returning them to service. Now we'll look really quickly at a couple that are failures. This is a genuine Japanese NTN, as you see here. It's not marked as Fuji Heavy Industries, but this is the one where we have a failure of the hydraulic system. This one got really loose, really sloppy. It started making a knocking noise. If you have a knocking in your engine, rarely, but not always, it could be this time belt tensioner going. When they get, when this piston starts losing hydraulic pressure, when they don't hold the proper amount of tension, as the belt comes around and flops, it'll make this thing start jumping, and when it jumps, this piston will tap the inside of the tensioner bracket and it'll make a knocking noise. So if a tensioner fails, you can get an engine knock that sounds very similar to a spun rod bearing. So be wary of that. You know, automatically a knocking in the engine is not a spun rod bearing. Most of the time it is, but you have a possibility of it being tensioner. The $300 Outback we featured back, I think beginning of this year, it has that issue. A lot of you noted in the comments it sounded like it had a rod knock, but I already put the stethoscope, mechanic stethoscope in there, and I've already diagnosed that this is the issue. Pulled the timing cover off and saw the fluid leaking around, so it's got a knocking time belt tensioner. So one other thing to look at if you're inspecting and reuse, make sure there's no hydraulic fluid up here. Make sure it's dry. There is a little bit will leak out under normal use, but you got to take the specifications from the service manual and make sure it's still got the proper amount of tension to make sure it's not blown out completely. But yeah, usually when they blow out, they look like this. This one's not a blowout. It's just dark and dirty because this one was on a timing belt set that failed. This is a junky Chinese aftermarket one. Cheap fasteners, no NTN, no Japan marking, you know, not what you want to put on there. The bearings, Chinese bearings, a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, I've had a couple comments saying I'm a nationalist that for dogging things that come from China. China has a reputation, a long history of making cheap, junky goods, stealing people's designs, you know, ripping off copyrights. It's the truth of the matter. You can not like that information all you want, but Chinese bearings are not the same as German or Japanese bearings. They're just not. You can have a Chinese company, for the right amount of money, build a bearing close to the quality of a German or Japanese component, but the average one that is getting put in these timing belt kits, like you get off of eBay or Amazon, that are no name brand or some off brand, it is the cheapest that they can get made and put in a box to get your money. You get what you pay for. Always remember that in life. Buy once, cry once. Quality costs money. Cheap in, cheap out. So here's another aftermarket one. This was in an AC Delco kit. I didn't even know AC Delco made Subaru kits. This one, perplexingly, is made in Canada, stamped on here. Never seen a Canadian Subaru EJ timing belt tensioner. Now, the pulley, the bearing on the pulley is unmarked. Being it's unmarked and just looking from the grade quality of the fastener, I would assume it's a Chinese bearing. But the tensioner body is made in Canada, as is laser etched on here. That's why the tensioner hydraulics look so much beefier and bigger. Not necessarily a good thing. Bigger is not always better. So not sure, if this would be okay to run compared to the original Japanese stuff, or if it's something to be wary of. But that is definitely a much larger diameter piston. So I don't know if it's still got the same hydraulic pressures or what. But, just put on it what Subaru designed to put on it, and you should be good. Here's another one that was leaking. Another one genuine. One that was probably on for 200,000 miles or so. That's the thing. You really want to replace these at the 80 to 100,000 mile mark as a whole kit. You don't want to just put a belt on, because all this stuff, these are what normally fail. The tensioners and the pulleys. You got to think, the ball bearings in these bearing assemblies are spinning very high RPM with the engine running, much less when you're going down the interstate at 3,000 RPM, 2,500 RPM. These things are booking. They're sealed bearings. You can't get in there and relubricate them. They have a life cycle. Once all that lubrication is slung out of there and they start running dry and they get noisy, it's not much longer before they just get hot, seize up, throw all the guts out of them, lock up, and then when that happens, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to clash, bend valves, you're going to tear timing belts apart, you're going to jump timing. It's not a good time. It's not a cheap time. Being cheap on your timing set costs you an engine. So I'd rather put timing belts on prematurely than have to rebuild an engine. So that's a quick look at the tensioners. Moving on from there, we have this is one of the idler pulleys, and specifically we're looking at non-turbo dual overhead cam kits and single overhead cam kits. They all basically have the same components. The turbos have an extra small little idler, but we're not going to talk about that in this video. So we've got some aftermarket ones here and here, both marked China. And then we have some Japanese original ones, as you may be able to see in there, marked NSK. NSK is, let's see, NSK and Japan. So some of these pulleys have a lip on the back, some of these don't. I believe the dual overhead cams don't have a lip, and I believe these single overhead cams do have a lip. There are some disadvantages of this pulley. Because it does have a single bearing. As you see, there's a gap here between the outer pulley, or the outer portion of this idler, and the inner mounting point. You see I can put my finger in there, and then from the front I can put my finger in there. That's a single bearing. There's only one set of rollers in this pulley. So one quick way, one check of these is normally an auditory check, is to spin them on the engine. See how quickly they spin, see how noisy they are when they spin. Here, let's see if we can hear this one. I'm not sure if my mic's going to pick that up. So these do have some noise and spinning. These are brand new. They should be kind of stiff to spin brand new. But again, I don't like using the Chinese bearings. They're just not the same quality as the Japanese. Avoid them. So one upgrade for this pulley, since it is a single bearing, is to buy doubles of the next pulley we're about to look at, which is the upper pulley on the right-hand side of the engine. Sorry, I was going to say passenger side, but I know that I have a lot of European and right-hand drive Subaru owners, so everything's backwards. I can't go by seating position. So this is the lower right pulley on the single overhead cam. We're going to look at the upper right idler, which is another smooth pulley, which is this pulley. And as you see, it's pretty much the exact same size. The difference is this is a focus camera. The difference is, there we go, this is a double bearing. There are two sets of roller bearings in here compared to the other. So this is a much stronger bearing. It's going to give you much longer life. This is an original Japanese, these NTN NSK Koyo, I can't remember. This is a Koyo bearing, K-O-Y-O. So this is an original Koyo. This is a Chinese aftermarket here. This is a Chinese aftermarket here. This is another Japanese Koyo there, just making sure it wasn't another brand. Another spin. This one's relatively quiet. This one. All right, you hear that? Hopefully the mic's picking it up. That's a bearing that's running dry. You can see from the dirtiness of it, that's normally a good indication when your components are getting to end of life if they're dirty like this. If they're still relatively clean, that's a good sign. But normally when they're dirty like this, that means that most of the oil and stuff has gotten hot, leaked out, spun out, and it's attracted dirt in the timing set, as you see on my hands. And that's an indicator that it's getting to end of life. But that noise, if they're rough, if they're loud when you spin them, means they're running dry. They're at the end of life. Replace them before you blow them apart. So this is the biggest failure I see on EJ series engines. I've actually got a failure one here to show you. This is the cogged pulley. This sits on the actual water pump itself. And this is the highest failure component I see. 99% of the time when I see failed timing sets where the belt has not broken, it's usually this. But this usually breaks the belt as well. We've got belts to show you in a second. So this is a Chinese aftermarket from a Gates kit. This is I believe this is another Chinese aftermarket. Yep, this is a Chinese aftermarket here. And then here is an original Japanese. I believe these are NSK. Yep, NSK. So as you can hear, this one's much louder than that double bearing we looked at. This one here was getting very close to end of life. As you can hear, it's running dry. These are brand new. I don't think they've even been run on an engine. But again, Chinese bearings, no good. Not worth wasting the money on those when you can get the good stuff for not much more. So here is one that's failed. Like I said, I see this all the time. You see the blow bearings in there. You see them flopping around. You see that discoloration, that bluing, that's from excessive heat. So what happened on this one? This, I believe, was that LL Bean Forester I bought with the broken timing belt. And, put head gaskets on. We rebuilt, I think, last summer or maybe 18. All my times running together. But this is what happens a lot. Is these run dry, as you heard there, get loud. They start building up lots of heat inside because they don't have the grease. And all those little ball bearings in there start to gall. They start to lose their roundness, lose their, their ability to slide freely around. And they start getting hot. Friction builds up, heat builds up, and before long, they seize up like a rock. I can't spin this. It's just spinning in my fingers. The inner part is seized to the outer part. When that stops spinning and it starts shooting ball bearings out and it shoots the cover off there, you see the cover on the back is actually starting to protrude here where the ball bearings are locked together. Once that happens, you're going to break a belt or the belt's going to throw off. And again, boom, boom, bye-bye engine. Bye-bye valves. So that is the highest failure item I see. This is actually the belt off of that engine. Right here. As you can see, it tore the belt and ripped teeth off because all of the rest of the engine was trying to turn this belt, but that pulley was completely locked up, so it had nowhere to go but to be pulled apart. It was in a tug of war. The crankshaft was trying to pull this sucker, and the teeth were tightly cogged to the pulley that wouldn't turn, so rip and tear. So, you know, this car would have probably kept running, would have been fine. It had a newer timing belt on it, but again, that's the danger of replacing a timing belt without replacing the components. The components usually fail before the belt does. So always check your belt. This one wasn't too terrible, but like I said, it died because of that cogged pulley. So let's talk about belts real quick before we end out the video. I know we're getting a little long-winded here. I think we're about 20-minute mark. So this is a brand new Gates belt. I'm not opposed to Gates timing belts. It's just the rest of their kit. The Gates belts are made in the USA. A lot of people use the Gates blue Kevlar belt on high-performance STI WRX turbo builds. But recently, well, not recently, the whole time that we've been running them, I myself installed a couple. I put one on my WRX. And a buddy of mine that we talked about gave me the FA engine, Stewart, at Shift Fast Motorsports. Sees it constantly. I've seen it a lot. The blue and the exterior part of the belt starts coming off on all these idlers and stuff. Once you pull the belt off after, you know, a couple thousand miles, it starts pulling off. Probably nothing, probably just the die, but that sort of weirds us out. We don't want to see parts of timing belt coming off on pulley. So kind of started to avoid the Gates belts as well as the kit. But new belts, you're going to see this writing on here. You'll see Gates or Subaru or whatever. You'll see your timing marks. The dots on the Gates and the arrow is for the crankshaft. The arrow points from the crankshaft to the left-hand cylinder bank always. Then you'll have your little marks for your timing marks on the pulleys for the cam timing. So Subaru original belts. Subaru does not make belts. Subaru belts are made by Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi, not Mitsubishi, not the car manufacturer. Although I don't know if they are some tied together or not. So this belt here, this is, I believe this is a genuine Subaru belt. You can just make out the text. I don't know what's up with my focus throughout this video, guys. I do apologize. The camera is not wanting to play nicely today. But you can see, you can barely make out the writing still. This belt was right to the end of life. You can still see some of the timing marks pretty clearly. But as I've heard, I don't know how true this is or not, but I use it as a go-to. I've heard that Subaru genuine Mitsubishi belts are designed for their text to last right about 80,000 miles. If you get a belt that's completely black, you can't read anything on it, it's time to change it. A little past time to change it. It's just a quick, easy way to pull a timing cover off, bump the engine over, and check to see if the writing's still very visible, very legible, if it's kind of faded, or if it's completely gone, to kind of gauge the age of the belt. If you, say, bought a used car, don't know the service history of it, and you know, want to check the timing. So if you've got a completely black belt, if you're starting to see these little zebra stripes in it, if you're starting to see some cracking up close, and like I said, you don't know the history of the car, go ahead and get a timing belt. Get a kit. Go ahead and replace it. You don't want to wait, because if you wait, it's going to blow apart. It's going to cost you an engine 9 times out of 10. Sometimes when they break, they don't, by the grace of whatever, the car gods, they don't destroy the engine. I've bought 2 that have jumped and haven't had destroyed engine, but I've seen plenty that have jumped and destroyed engines. But it's not worth the gamble, in my opinion, to not change it if, you know, it's just a little early. So that's that belt there. Here's the Mitsubishi belts. These are, I just buy them straight from Mitsubishi off Amazon because sometimes it's cheaper to price piece kits together. I believe I had to do that on that 2005 Forester due to the fact that Ison does not make a kit for them due to their weird water pump. I had to buy the water pump and all the components separate. All of those are in the Amazon storefront. Those are in the links below. But Mitsubishi belts, really quickly, that's a Mitsubishi's emblem. It's the triangle with the 3 stars in it. I'll try to put a picture of a brand new Subaru timing belt on the screen now. And as you note in it, it says Subaru and all that. But you'll see the Mitsubishi star triangle emblem because the belts are made by Mitsubishi and just stamped Subaru and resold. So Aisin kits come with Mitsubishi belts. People are like, well, that's not a Subaru genuine belt. But yeah, it is. It just doesn't say Subaru on it. So, throwing things everywhere, talking to myself. So here's another old belt. All of the writing is gone on it. There is some paint pen here from where I used this on another vehicle to reset timing, one that had jumped or one for broken belt or something. But yeah, look for the zebra stripes. This one's just starting to get them. Getting close, look at the webbing. You'll see lots of little spider web cracks and stuff like that. You know, at that point, just go ahead and get you a kit and replace it. On the timing belts, you never want to do this to a timing belt, especially a new one. You never want to bend them. Do not ever bend them smaller than the diameter that they go around for the smallest timing component. Bending them like this can actually break some of the webbing in there and take the strength out of the belt. You never want to do this. I'm only doing this because this is a no-good belt. But do not bend them. Do not kink them. Do not crimp them. That hurts the service life of the belt. Big no-no. Do not do. So guys, that'll basically do it for this video. I know it got a little long on talking about EJ timing components, what to look for, what to avoid, how to inspect them, and you know, the importance of changing them on time and not procrastinating. This is a service you don't want to wait on. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.